The subway screeched to a halt, doors sliding open with metallic hiss. Monday morning rush hour packed the car shoulder to shoulder with commuters drowning in their own worlds. The air smelled of coffee, damp coats, and that faint underground metallic tinge. Near the door stood Margaret Wilson, 68, her silver hair neatly pinned back. Her weather hands clutched a faded canvas tote against her chest. Despite her simple beige coat and worn shoes, something in her posture, straight-backed and precise, seemed oddly out of place among the slouching commuters. Across from her, legs sprawled wide, sat a young man in his 20s. Baseball cap turned backward, hoodie loose, foam glow illuminating his uninterested face. An empty seat beside him, the only one available in the packed car. Margaret approached, her voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, would you mind if I sat down?" The man didn't look up. "Train's full, lady. Gotta claim your spot early." He stretched his leg further across the seat. A middle-aged man nearby adjusted his glasses, noticed the exchange, then looked away. No one said a word. Margaret didn't argue. She stood silently, swaying with the train's motion. Her arms hugged her bag closer. Inside were 2 apples bread and a jar of strawberry preserves, her Monday market purchases. The subway jolted suddenly around a bend. The lights flickered as the car dipped. Margaret braced herself against the pole. Her shoulder accidentally brushed against the young man's arm. He jerked away, exaggerating the motion. "Don't touch me, hag," he barked. Heads turned briefly, then quickly looked away again. Margaret's weathered face flushed pink, but her eyes, sharp blue beneath deep wrinkles, narrowed almost imperceptibly. The young man smirked, leaning forward, louder now, playing to the audience. "Seriously, y'all see this? Can't even ride in peace without someone invading your space." No one responded. A teenage girl across the aisle hovered her fingers over phone camera, but never pressed record. The man reached out and tapped Margaret's tote. "What's in the bag, Grandma? Something worth fighting over?" He chuckled, flicking the strap with 2 fingers. Margaret shook her head slightly. "Please don't," she said quietly, her voice firm despite its softness. He didn't stop. He grabbed the bottom of the bag, tilting it. 1 apple fell, then another, rolling under seats. The jar shifted but didn't break. Margaret gasped softly and bent down, steadying herself on one knee, trying to collect the fruit. Then came the elbow, quick, deliberate, not a shove, not a punch, but a violent jerk of his arm that caught her just under the collarbone. Margaret stumbled sideways, her back hitting the metal frame of the subway door with a dull thud. The impact wasn't loud, but the silence that followed was deafening. A boy in a puffer jacket opened his mouth, then closed it. An older woman covered her lips with her scarf. No one moved. The man leaned back, proud. "Lesson of the day," he announced to the crowd. "Don't lean on strangers." Margaret steadied herself against the pole. Something changed in her stance, subtle, almost imperceptible. Her feet shifted slightly wider apart. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes, previously downcast, now scanned the car with methodical precision. A woman whispered to her companion. Someone should help her, but no one did. Margaret straightened her shoulders. For a brief moment, the trembling elderly woman disappeared, replaced by something harder, something forged in fire. Then, just as quickly, the vulnerable facade returned as she reached again for her fallen items. The young man watched Margaret struggle to retrieve her groceries, his smirk widening. "Oh, come on, you can crawl now? It's just fruit." She didn't answer. Her hand stretched toward the last apple that had rolled beneath his foot. He lifted his boot, then slammed it down. The apple burst with a dull crunch, juices leaking across the grimy floor. The crowd flinched. Margaret looked up, their eyes meeting. He raised an eyebrow, tilted his head like he'd just swatted a bug. "You done?" he asked casually. Margaret said nothing, but something in her eyes hardened. Her hand trembled as she picked up the bruised second apple and the jar of jam. But the trembling wasn't from fear, it was from restraint. "You know," she said quietly, "where I served, we were taught respect." "Served?" The man laughed. "What, at the retirement home cafeteria?" A second young man nearby joined in, high-fiving the first. Probably thinks the senior center is military service. Margaret stood fully upright now. Despite her 68 years, despite her modest 5 feet 4 inches frame, she suddenly seemed taller. Vietnam, 1975. Women weren't supposed to be there either, but some of us were. The first man rolled his eyes. Sure, Grandma. And I'm the president. You should walk away now, Margaret said, her voice dropping lower, calmer. This doesn't need to escalate. Oh, the second man mocked, stepping closer. She's threatening us. I'm so scared of Granny. The first aggressor stood now, towering over Margaret. What are you going to do? Hit me with your purse. Margaret didn't back away. Her eyes, clear, focused, assessing, tracked his movements with unnerving precision. She didn't appear frightened. Instead, she looked prepared. I don't want trouble, she said simply. Too late, he replied, shoving her shoulder. Margaret absorbed the push without stumbling, which seemed to surprise him. The train rattled deeper into the tunnel, the hum of steel on steel filling the silence. Most passengers looked away, uncomfortable witnesses to cruelty. They weren't brave enough to stop. One man, however, watched carefully from the far end of the car, his hand tightening on the overhead rail. Back off, Margaret said, her voice carrying an authority that seemed out of place coming from her small frame. Last warning. The first aggressor laughed, turning to his friend. You hear that? We got warned by Grandma. A third young man approached from further down the car. Problem here? He asked, not concerned for Margaret, but eager to join the entertainment. No problem, the first man replied. Just teaching respect to the elderly. He turned back to Margaret. Unless she thinks she can take all of us. Margaret's eyes darted between the three men, calculating. Her stance shifted subtly, weight centered, hands relaxed at her sides, breathing controlled. Nothing dramatic, just small adjustments no ordinary passenger would make. 3 against 1 elderly woman, she noted quietly. That make you feel powerful? The third man snorted. She's got a mouth on her. Maybe we should shut it, said the second, stepping closer. A woman across the aisle clutched her phone, recording now but still silent. Other passengers pressed themselves against the walls, creating distance. You have mothers? Margaret asked suddenly. Sisters? Would you want someone treating them this way? The first aggressor rolled his eyes. Save the lecture. He reached for her bag again, this time yanking it hard. The canvas tore, content spilling across the floor. The jar of preserve shattered, red spreading like blood across the grimy surface. Something changed in Margaret's eyes. Not anger. Something colder, more focused. Something forged in combat zones that these young men couldn't comprehend. That was unnecessary, she said, voice deadly calm. What are you going to do about it, Grandma? The first man challenged, pushing his face close to hers. Margaret didn't flinch. I've faced worse than you in Saigon. The 3 men laughed in unison, circling closer. The first reached out to push her again, harder this time. Margaret didn't move backward. She stood firm, like an oak tree meeting wind. This wasn't normal. People her age, her size, they fell when pushed. But Margaret didn't, and that unexpected resistance finally registered in the young man's eyes as confusion. The confusion in the first aggressor's eyes quickly turned to anger. Think you're tough, huh? He snarled, drawing back his arm. Before he could swing, movement flashed from the side of the car. A fourth man in a dark hoodie lunged forward, something metallic glinting in his hand. A small baton, compact but solid. He swung it hard, catching Margaret on the temple before anyone could react. The impact made a sickening sound. Margaret's knees buckled instantly. Her right shoulder slammed into a steel pole as she fell, body folding sideways onto the subway floor. Blood immediately began trickling from her hairline, running in a thin red line down her weathered cheek. Gasps erupted throughout the car. A woman screamed. The 4 aggressors stood over Margaret, the baton wielder breathing heavily. That'll teach her, the first man said, but his voice wavered. This had gone further than he'd expected. For several seconds, Margaret didn't move. Blood pooled beneath her silver hair. staining the dirty subway floor. The train lurched around a corner, and her body shifted limply with the motion. Then a twitch of her fingers. A slow, controlled breath. Margaret's eyes opened. Not wide, just enough. Her gaze focused, cleared, hardened, with deliberate movements. She placed one palm flat against the floor and began to push herself up. Blood continued streaming down her face, but her eyes, sharp as flint, never blinked. "Stay down, lady," the man with the baton warned, raising it again. Margaret didn't acknowledge him. She continued rising methodically, like someone who had fallen many times before and always gotten back up. Her movements had changed, no longer those of a frail older woman, but precise, mechanical, efficient. The man with the baton stepped forward, uncertain now. "I said stay down." Margaret finally stood upright, blood soaking her collar. She wiped it from her eye with a steady hand, then settled into a stance that no civilian would recognize, but any combat veteran would immediately identify. Balanced, grounded, ready. "For against one," she said quietly, her voice unwavering despite the wound. "And you still needed a weapon." The subway car had gone completely silent. Every passenger watched, frozen. The man who had been observing from afar, and now moved closer, recognizing something in Margaret that the others couldn't see. "You boys made 3 mistakes," Margaret continued, her voice stronger now. "You chose violence. You drew blood, and you assumed I was helpless." The 4 men exchanged uneasy glances. Something was very wrong with this picture. The man with the baton struck first, swinging wildly at Margaret's head. But this time, she wasn't there. With a fluid motion that defied her age, she sidestepped, her left hand rising to catch his wrist mid-swing. In the same motion, her right hand gripped his elbow, applying pressure to a nerve point that made his fingers spasm open. The baton clattered to the floor. Before anyone could react, Margaret stepped inside his guard, executed a simple hip rotation, and redirected his momentum. The man stumbled forward, off balance, and crashed face first into the subway door with a hollow thud. The first aggressor started, but Margaret was already moving. The second man lunged at her, arms wide for a bear hug. Margaret dropped her center of gravity slightly, waited until the last possible second, then pivoted. Her elbow found the soft spot beneath his rib cage with surgical precision. As he doubled over, gasping, she swept his leg with her foot, dropping him to the floor. By now, the entire car was watching in stunned silence. Phones recorded, but no one interfered. Not to help the men, not to help Margaret. They simply stared, transfixed. The third aggressor backed up slightly, suddenly uncertain. "Who the hell are you, lady?" Margaret didn't answer. Blood still trickled from her temple, but her breathing remained steady, her movements economical. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, just ruthlessly effective techniques born from decades of training. The first aggressor, recovered from his shock, charged forward with a roar. Margaret simply shifted her weight, redirected his momentum with an open palm against his shoulder, and helped him continue his journey into the hard edge of a subway seat. He crumpled, moaning. The fourth man, who had wielded the baton, climbed back to his feet. His nose was bleeding from the impact of the door, but rage had replaced his earlier smugness. He feinted left, then attacked from the right. Margaret read the move like it was telegraphed. She stepped into his attack rather than away, trapped his arm against her side, and executed a textbook joint manipulation. The crack of his wrist dislocating was audible throughout the car. He dropped to his knees, howling. 3 remained on the floor. The third man, who had yet to physically engage, backed away, hands raised. "Look, we're done, okay? We're done." Margaret stood in the center of the car, surrounded by the fallen men. Blood matted her silver hair, but her stance remained solid, her breathing controlled. She hadn't thrown a single punch, just redirected force, applied pressure, and let physics and anatomy do the rest. A teenage boy in the back whispered, "Holy shit." An older gentleman stared in disbelief. "That's military training," he muttered. "Special forces, maybe." The train began to slow as it approached the next station. Margaret reached down and picked up her torn bag and the unbroken apple. One of the fallen men groaned. Another tried to crawl away. The third stared at her with newfound respect tinged with fear. Margaret looked at them impassively. "All I wanted," she said softly, "was a seat." As the train pulled into the station, a middle-aged man in a veteran's cap approached Margaret cautiously. "Ma'am," he said, his voice reverent, "you're Colonel Wilson, aren't you? 5th Special Forces Group instructor?" A murmur rippled through the car. Margaret dabbed at her temple with a handkerchief, nodding slightly. "I thought so," the man continued. "You trained my unit in '95. Best combat instructor we ever had." The first aggressor, still clutching his ribs, looked up in disbelief. "Combat instructor?" "Colonel Margaret Wilson," the veteran explained, loud enough for everyone to hear. One of the first women to serve as combat advisors in Vietnam. Later became the highest-ranking female Special Forces combat instructor in military history. A woman nearby gasped. "I read about her. 30 years of service. Decorated 3 times. The train doors opened. Margaret straightened her coat and turned to the veteran. "Thank you for your service," she said simply. "No, ma'am. Thank you for yours." As Margaret stepped toward the exit, passengers moved aside, creating a path. No one spoke. No one needed to. The 4 aggressors remained on the floor, stunned by the revelation. Just before exiting, Margaret turned back. "Next time," she said, addressing not just her attackers, but everyone in the car, "remember that respect costs nothing, and appearances can be deceiving." She stepped onto the platform, her small figure soon lost in the crowd, leaving behind a subway car forever changed by her presence. Margaret walked slowly up the subway stairs, her injured temple throbbing. Outside, the city continued its Monday morning rush, oblivious to what had transpired below. At the street corner, she paused at a fruit vendor, buying 2 fresh apples. The young vendor noticed her injury. "You okay, ma'am?" "I've had worse," she replied with a small smile. As she continued her journey home, Margaret reflected on the encounter, not the violence. Violence had never been her first choice, but on the blindness of those who judge by appearance alone. Perhaps some lessons could only be taught the hard way. But if even one person on that train remembered to show more respect to others, especially the elderly, her bruises would be worth it. Remember, appearances can be deceiving. Don't judge others by how they look or their age. Have you ever misjudged someone? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Show respect to our veterans who sacrificed so much for our country.